Ferrari said they were closing the gap. Hamilton's data says otherwise. Miami wasn't just another missed podium for Lewis Hamilton, it was a revelation. Deep inside the telemetry, hidden behind vague radio messages and polite press statements, something didn't add up. While Ferrari's PR machine kept selling the dream of steady progress, the raw numbers told a different story. Hamilton's laps were consistently almost a full second slower than Oscar Piastri's McLaren, a car Ferrari publicly claims they're fighting toe-to-toe, but telemetry doesn't lie. Sector by sector, Hamilton was losing time not because of mistakes or tire wear, but because the car simply wasn't giving him what had been promised. And here's the twist. While Leclerc fought with Norris and tangled with strategy, Hamilton spent the entire race stuck in a no-man's land, pushing a car that didn't want to be pushed. He said it himself over the radio, "We're being held back by something." So the question is, was Ferrari wrong in their simulations, or were they hiding the truth from the start? It started with a pattern, one so subtle that casual viewers would miss it. In the high-speed sweeps of Sector 2, where downforce and balance define your fate, Hamilton's car was consistently losing tenths, even on fresh tires. That's not driver error, that's chassis behavior. Or worse, a car concept falling apart under real-world pressure. We compared Hamilton's data to McLaren's and even to Carlos Sainz's runs, and the drop-off wasn't just on exits. It was mid-corner, where trust in the front end is everything. You could hear it in Lewis's tone, not frustration, but disappointment. He said, "The front just isn't there on lap 21, a line buried in Ferrari's post-race summary." This matters, because when Ferrari claimed before Miami that upgrades had unlocked stability and reduced tire degradation, they weren't just talking to fans. They were setting expectations for the paddock. And when those expectations collapsed, silence. But the truth is, Hamilton's telemetry may be exposing something deeper, a performance ceiling Ferrari knew was there, but hoped no one would notice. While TV coverage focused on Leclerc's battles, Hamilton's radio was telling a much darker story. Lap after lap, his tone grew flatter, not angry, but resigned. "Let me know if we're racing or just holding position," he asked early on. No reply. Later, "Do we have a plan here, or are we reacting?" Again, silence. This wasn't a man confused by race strategy. This was a driver not trusting the people on the pit wall. And then came the key moment. After being undercut and trapped in traffic, Hamilton said simply, "I don't understand why we're doing this." The phrase echoed something he'd said earlier this year at Ferrari HQ, questioning whether performance targets were being hit or just promised. Insiders later revealed Hamilton requested a closed-door debrief with senior engineers post-Miami, unusual for a driver still new to the team. Something wasn't sitting right. The question isn't just about pace anymore, it's about transparency. If Ferrari's new era is built on communication and clarity, why does Hamilton sound more in the dark now than he did at Mercedes last year? Before Miami, Ferrari insiders spoke confidently. New floor, revised rear suspension geometry, and aero tweaks were said to bring 0.3 on average per lap. But when Hamilton hit the track, the reality was brutal, not just slower than expected, but fundamentally unstable at high speed. This isn't just a case of upgrades not delivering, it's a simulation model that may be lying to itself. Sources close to Maranello hinted at growing tension between the simulation team and trackside engineers. One engineer speaking off record said, "The numbers look good until we hit the asphalt. Then it's a different car." And that's what Hamilton walked into. A team still learning to translate data into action, and a car that behaves one way on the screen and another in Miami's 35°C heat. The worst part? Ferrari knows this. That's why expectations were carefully managed pre-race. That's why public statements were vague. But when telemetry like Hamilton's makes the discrepancy undeniable, you have to ask, did Ferrari really believe the upgrades would work? Or were they covering their bets hoping no one would dig too deep? On paper, Carlos Sainz outqualified and outraced Hamilton in Miami. But dig into the stints, and something doesn't sit right. During the early laps, Hamilton was matching signs through heavy braking zones, suggesting similar confidence on entry. But as fuel loads dropped and tire wear increased, Hamilton's times flatlined, while Sainz found grip. That's not driving style, that's car response. It raised a question whispered inside the garage. Was Hamilton running a different setup, or was his car not receiving the same updates? Now, before anyone screams conspiracy, let's be clear, Ferrari denies any inequality between drivers. But remember, Lewis joined this project late. He doesn't have the full ergonomic control Leclerc and Sainz built over years. And as some mechanics admitted, not all parts arrive in pairs when development is tight. Hamilton's side of the garage may have been running with subtle compromises, a damper spec here, a cooling config there, things that don't show in headlines but cost tenths. And when those tenths add up, you get a legend stuck in P8, asking questions no one wants to answer. So again we ask, was Ferrari truly equal in Miami, or was Hamilton testing more than just the track? After the race, the atmosphere inside Ferrari's motorhome was tense. There were no celebrations, no chest-thumping interviews. What happened on track wasn't a disaster, but the silence said everything. Engineers avoided cameras, PR staff rushed Hamilton through mixed zone duties, and according to 2 journalists on site, you could feel it. Something broke behind the scenes. Leclerc spoke vaguely about areas to work on, Sainz dodged questions about team dynamics, but Hamilton, he said nothing. Not even his usual coded optimism, just a polite nod, a handshake, and straight into the engineer's room. That's where, according to one Italian outlet, Lewis requested a second technical debrief, not just with his engineers, but with Ferrari's aerodynamics and strategy heads. In F1, that's rare. It means a driver is no longer talking about setup. He's questioning philosophy. And that confirms what many feared. Ferrari's internal confidence may be fractured. One part of the team builds hope, another sees the telemetry. And Hamilton, he's caught between both, expected to trust a system that may still be searching for itself. So who's right, the dreamers or the data? There's a phrase quietly making the rounds in the paddock. Ferrari's data is too optimistic. It's not just about lap time projections, it's about philosophy. The current car, despite upgrades, still struggles with heat sensitivity, inconsistent traction zones, and mid-corner unpredictability. These aren't race-to-race issues, they're DNA problems. And Hamilton's telemetry in Miami exposed all of it. The front-end inconsistencies he felt, that's not just setup, that's aero instability at yaw. The poor traction out of slow corners, it's linked to power unit mapping and rear suspension compliance. Ferrari knows this. They've known it since the SF23. But the public line has always been, we're closing the gap. But here's the brutal reality. You can't fix architecture with aero patches. So why the spin? Because in F1, perception is currency. Sponsors, fans, even internal morale depend on the belief that progress is happening. But when a 7-time world champion starts asking for technical transparency and the numbers don't back the narrative, the mask starts to slip. And that's what Miami revealed. Not a failure of upgrades, but a failure of honesty. Ferrari can't afford many more weekends like Miami, not with Mercedes resurging, McLaren threatening every podium, and Red Bull still out of reach. But the problem now isn't just performance, it's trust. Hamilton came to Ferrari not just for speed, but for belief. The promise of a system ready to rise. But when telemetry contradicts the narrative, when upgrades misfire, and when silence replaces answers, belief erodes. Inside the paddock, murmurs are growing. Engineers questioning simulations, sponsors asking for clarity, and Hamilton, he's watching everything. He didn't call out the team publicly, but insiders say his post-race tone in the factory was cutting but calm. A message was sent, not in anger, but in precision. This isn't good enough. The media will spin Miami as just a tough weekend, but the data says otherwise. This wasn't a dip, it was exposure. So here's the question Ferrari can't let anymore. Did they overpromise? Or are they hiding how far they still have to go?